I sit in my car on Maple Street, engine off, watching raindrops race down the windshield in crooked lines. The wipers stopped their rhythm 5 minutes ago, but I haven't moved to turn them back on. The silence feels deliberate now, like I'm holding my breath underwater. The reception hall glows warm and yellow through the rain, its windows fogged with the heat of celebration. I can see shapes moving inside, the occasional flash of a white dress, the blur of couples spinning beneath string lights. Music drifts out whenever someone opens the door, carrying with it the smell of gardenias and champagne, but it fades quickly in the damp air. My hand finds the invitation in my breast pocket without thinking, fingers tracing the embossed letters through the fabric of my jacket. Amanda and Ryan, June 14th. I've touched this paper so many times over the past 2 weeks that the fold is wearing soft, threatening to tear. I know every word by heart, from the elegant script to the small note scrawled in Malcolm's handwriting at the bottom. Please come. I need you there. The wedding band on my left hand catches what little light filters through the clouds, a thin gold circle that has grown loose over the years. I rotate it with my thumb, feeling the familiar weight of it, the way it's worn a shallow groove in my skin. 12 years of marriage, and this ring has never left my finger. Not once. But tonight it feels foreign, like borrowed jewelry I've forgotten to return. My phone buzzes against the dashboard, the screen lighting up with Malcolm's name. Where are you? You promised me. I stare at the words until they fade to black, then set the phone face down without responding. I promised him. Such simple words, but they carry the weight of something I'm not ready to examine. Through the rain-blurred windshield, I watch a couple hurry from the parking lot to the entrance, the woman lifting her dress to keep it from the puddles, the man's hand protective at her back. They disappear through the doors, and for a moment the music swells louder, more insistent. A slow song, something I almost recognize but can't quite place. I should go home. Evelyn is in Vermont until Sunday, visiting her sister, but the house will be exactly as she left it. Her coffee mug in the sink, rinsed but not washed. Her reading glasses folded neatly on the nightstand. The throw pillows arranged just so on the couch, each one placed with the unconscious precision of someone who has lived in the same space for over a decade. Instead, I find myself reaching for the door handle. The rain hits my face immediately, cold and sharp, soaking through my jacket before I've taken 3 steps. I should have brought an umbrella, but I wasn't thinking clearly when I left the house. I wasn't thinking clearly about any of this. I move quickly across the parking lot, my dress shoes sliding slightly on the wet asphalt, and pause just outside the entrance. Through the glass doors, I can see everything. The bride, Amanda, radiant in ivory silk, her dark hair pinned with small white flowers. The groom, Ryan, young and earnest, adjusting his tie with nervous fingers. Round tables draped in cream cloth, each one centered with mason jars full of wildflowers. It looks like every wedding I've ever attended, familiar and timeless and safe. And then I see him. Malcolm stands near the back of the room, one shoulder leaning against a pillar draped in fairy lights. He's talking to an older woman, probably an aunt, his head tilted in that way he has when he's really listening, when he's giving someone his complete attention. The light catches the silver at his temples, just a few threads woven through the dark brown, and I realize with a start that he's older than I remember. Not old, but no longer the young man I met 3 years ago at that charity dinner. He's wearing a navy suit that fits him perfectly, no tie, his shirt open at the collar in a way that manages to look both casual and elegant. His hands move as he talks, gesturing in small, precise movements, and I remember those hands. The way they held his coffee cup that afternoon when he asked me to come tonight. The way they drummed against the cafe table while he explained about his family, about feeling adrift, about needing someone who would make him seem anchored. As if sensing my gaze, he looks up. Our eyes meet across the crowded room, through the dancers and the flower arrangements and the gentle chaos of celebration. And something shifts in his expression. Recognition, yes, but something else too. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. He smiles, and it's the kind of smile that starts small and spreads slowly, reaching his eyes and softening his whole face. I feel something tighten in my chest, a pressure that's part anxiety and part something I don't want to name. My grip on the door handle increases, knuckles white against the brass, and I'm suddenly aware of everything at once. The rain dripping from my hair onto my collar, the sound of my own breathing, the way my heart has started beating just a little too fast. Malcolm excuses himself from his conversation and starts making his way toward me, weaving between tables and laughing guests. He doesn't hurry, but there's something purposeful in his movement, something that makes me think of a compass needle finding true north. I watch him approach and feel a familiar sensation, one I've been trying to ignore for weeks. It's the same feeling I had that first night we met, when he looked at me and said, "You have the look of someone who wants to be somewhere else." He was right then, and he's right now. Standing here on the threshold, rain-soaked and uncertain, I realize I've been wanting to be somewhere else for longer than I care to admit. Not just geographically, but fundamentally. I've been living a life that fits me like a suit tailored for someone else's body. Comfortable enough, but never quite right. Malcolm reaches the door and pushes it open, stepping just outside into the shelter of the overhang. The music from inside dims, but doesn't disappear, and I can smell his cologne, something warm and woody that I remember from our coffee meeting. "You made it," he says, and his voice carries that same note of relief I saw in his smile. "I wasn't sure you would." I almost didn't, I tell him, and it's the truth. I've been sitting in this parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to convince myself to drive away, to go home to my empty house and my careful life and pretend this invitation never arrived. "But you're here now," he says, and there's something in the way he says it that makes it sound like more than an observation, like an acknowledgement of something significant, a choice made rather than a simple arrival. The rain continues to fall around us, pattering against the awning above our heads, and for a moment we just stand there, looking at each other. I'm aware that this is a moment I'll remember, one of those instances that feels significant even as it's happening. The kind of moment that divides a life into before and after, though I don't fully understand why yet. Inside, someone laughs, bright and joyful, and Malcolm glances toward the sound before looking back at me. His family is in there, waiting. His sister on our wedding day, his parents, cousins and aunts and uncles who think he's drifting, who want to see him settled and anchored. And he's asked me to be that anchor, to play the role of someone who matters to him in a way that will satisfy their questions and concerns. It should be simple, a favor for someone who has become, almost without my noticing, important to me. A few hours of performance, of letting people assume what they want to assume, of being the steady presence Malcolm needs to navigate his family's expectations. But standing here in the rain, looking into his eyes, I know it won't be that simple. Nothing about Malcolm has ever been simple, from that first conversation 3 years ago to the phone calls that started coming more frequently, to the way he makes me feel like I'm seeing myself clearly for the first time in years. He reaches out and adjusts my jacket collar, a small gesture that brings his fingers close to my throat. The touch is brief and practical, but it sends warmth spreading through my chest, and I realize that whatever happens tonight, whatever role I'm meant to play, I'm already in deeper than I intended to be. "Are you ready?" he asks, and I nod, though I'm not sure I am. Not sure anyone ever really is for the moments that change everything. Together, we step through the doors and into the warm, bright chaos of celebration, leaving the rain and the silence behind us. But I carry them with me, the memory of those 20 minutes in my car, the weight of the choice I didn't realize I was making until it was already made. My life, until this moment, has been built on the foundation of small, predictable rituals. Every morning at 6:15, the coffee machine hums to life in our kitchen, its familiar gurgle filling the silence while Evelyn showers. By the time she emerges, dressed in the practical clothes of someone who spends her days among library stacks, I have her mug ready, prepared exactly how she's liked it for 12 years. 2 sugars, a splash of cream that turns the coffee the color of autumn leaves. Our house sits on the edge of town, a modest bungalow with white shutters and a lawn that I mow every Saturday morning in neat, overlapping lines. The neighbors compliment me on it sometimes, how precise it looks, how each blade of grass seems to know its place. I take pride in this. The way the edges are trimmed sharp against the sidewalk, the way the whole thing looks like it could be featured in a magazine about suburban contentment. Evelyn leaves for work at 7:30, her keys finding their designated bowl by the front door with the soft clink of metal against ceramic. She's worked at the library for 8 years now, processing returns and helping patrons find what they're looking for. She comes home smelling faintly of old paper and a lavender hand cream she keeps in her desk drawer. Our conversations over dinner are gentle and logistical. We're low on milk. Your mother called about Sunday dinner. The garbage disposal is making that sound again. There's nothing wrong with this life, nothing broken that needs fixing. We are two people who chose each other once, who built something steady and comfortable together. We planned for children in those early years, painted the spare room yellow, because we wanted to be surprised, but the children never came. After the second miscarriage, we stopped talking about it, and the yellow room became Evelyn's craft space, filled with yarn and half-finished quilts. I work at Morrison & Associates, managing accounts for a mid-sized construction company. The office is clean and quiet, the kind of place where the biggest excitement is someone bringing donuts on Friday morning. I've been there for 9 years, long enough that my desk has worn smooth under my forearms, long enough that I know exactly how much coffee to make for the break room and which clients will pay their invoices on time. My world outside of work and marriage is deliberately small. The weekly trip to the grocery store, where I follow the same route through the aisles, buying the same brand from the same shelves. An occasional drink after work with my colleague Davis, who talks mostly about his son's baseball games and his wife's book club. These interactions feel safe, contained, like conversations happening through glass. And then there was Malcolm. I met him 3 years ago at a charity fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, one of those events Evelyn and I attended because we felt we should, because people like us were expected to show up and write modest checks and make polite conversation over lukewarm chicken and wilted salad. I was standing near the auction table, pretending to study the donated items, when someone spoke behind me. "You have the look of someone who wants to be somewhere else." When I turned, there was Malcolm, holding a glass of wine and wearing the kind of smile that suggested he was equally out of place but somehow more amused by it. He was younger than me, maybe 30 to my 35, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it and eyes that seemed to see too much. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way, but there was something magnetic about him, something that made me want to keep looking. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. The auction items, the quality of the wine, the way charity events all felt like elaborate theater performances where everyone knew their roles. But underneath the casual conversation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The sense that someone was actually seeing me, not just the version of myself I presented to the world. After that night, Malcolm appeared in my life in small, irregular intervals. A phone call every few months, usually when he was between jobs or cities or relationships. Brief encounters at the coffee shop downtown, where he would appear at my table as if summoned, full of stories about places he'd been and things he'd tried. He had a way of living that seemed impromptu and fearless, the opposite of everything I'd built for myself. He worked in graphic design, but the kind where he could take projects from anywhere, work from coffee shops and hotel rooms and the borrowed apartments of friends. He told me once that he'd never signed a lease longer than 6 months, never owned furniture that couldn't fit in his car. The idea fascinated and terrified me in equal measure. Evelyn never asked about these occasional coffees, these phone calls that came at irregular intervals. If she noticed the slight change in my demeanor after speaking with Malcolm, the way I might stare out the kitchen window a little longer than usual, or take walks around the neighborhood that stretched past my normal route, she never mentioned it. Perhaps she assumed it was work stress, or the natural restlessness that comes to men approaching middle age. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday in early May, addressed to both of us in Malcolm's careful handwriting. But the message that followed was for me alone, delivered in a phone call that came while Evelyn was at her evening yoga class. "It's complicated," he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of wry amusement. "I need you there." He explained about his family's expectations, their concern about his unsettled life, their desire to see him with someone stable and grounded. He needed a date, someone who could play the role of anchor, who could make him appear less adrift in their eyes. When I told Evelyn about the wedding, she simply nodded and said she'd already planned to visit her sister that weekend anyway. No questions, no suspicion, just the mild interest of someone hearing about distant acquaintances. She helped me pick out a new tie, navy blue with a subtle pattern, and reminded me to drive carefully on the wet roads. Now, standing in the warm light of the reception hall beside Malcolm, I realized that my carefully ordered life has been preparation for this moment. All those years of routine and predictability of being the steady one, the reliable one, have equipped me to be exactly what Malcolm needs tonight. What I didn't anticipate was how much I would need this too. This chance to be someone different, someone whose presence matters in a way that goes beyond paying bills and maintaining lawns and making conversation about grocery lists. The conversation that changed everything happened 3 weeks before the wedding, in a small cafe downtown that Malcolm had chosen. It was the kind of place that served coffee in mismatched mugs and had tables that wobbled on uneven legs, the opposite of the chain establishments I usually frequented. Malcolm was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall, fingers drumming a restless rhythm against the scarred wooden surface. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. When he smiled at me, it didn't quite reach his eyes, and I realized this meeting was different from our casual encounters over the years. This wasn't one of his impromptu appearances in my predictable world. This was deliberate, necessary, weighted with something he needed to say. I ordered black coffee and sat across from him, waiting. Malcolm had never been someone who rushed into explanations, and I'd learned to let him find his own way to whatever he needed to share. He studied my face for a moment, as if trying to read something there, then leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "My family thinks I'm drifting," he said, his voice low enough that I had to lean in to hear him clearly. "They keep trying to fix me." He explained about his sister's wedding, about parents who worried and aunts who asked pointed questions, and cousins who had all settled into the kinds of lives that made sense to everyone. Marriages and mortgages and children's birthday parties. The whole architecture of conventional happiness that seemed to elude him, or that he seemed to deliberately avoid. "They want to see me with someone," he continued, stirring his coffee with the kind of precision that suggested nervous energy barely contained. "Someone who makes me look less like I'm running from something." I understood what he was asking before he finished explaining. He wanted me to be that someone, to accompany him to Amanda's wedding as more than a friend, to play the role of stability, of romantic attachment, of the kind of relationship that would satisfy his family's concerns and questions. It would be performance, an act of kindness between friends, a way for him to navigate a difficult family gathering with less scrutiny. I should have said no, should have explained about Evelyn, about the complexity of such a deception, about how wrong it felt to pretend something that could hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt. But when Malcolm looked at me across that wobbling table, something in his expression made the word yes rise in my throat before I could stop it. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his, just for a moment, just long enough for me to feel the warmth of his palm and the slight callus on his index finger from years of holding pencils and styluses. "Thank you," he said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. The day of the wedding arrived gray and humid, with a kind of thick air that promised rain by evening. I spent longer than usual choosing what to wear, settling finally on a charcoal suit that Evelyn had helped me pick out for a work event years ago. In the mirror, I looked like exactly what Malcolm needed me to be. Respectable, established, the kind of man who would make sense beside him in family photographs. Malcolm picked me up at 4, driving a borrowed car that smelled faintly of his cologne and someone else's cigarettes. He was nervous in a way I'd never seen before, his usual easy confidence replaced by something more brittle. As we drove toward the venue, he talked too much, filling the silence with observations about the weather and the traffic and the music on the radio. When he reached over to adjust my tie at a red light, his knuckles brushing against my jaw, the casual intimacy of the gesture caught me off guard. The touch was brief and practical, the kind of thing a partner might do without thinking, but it sent warmth spreading through my chest in a way that felt dangerous. At the reception, our roles as couple fell into place with surprising ease. Malcolm introduced me to relatives with a casual possessiveness that felt both natural and performed. "This is Julian," he would say, his hand finding the small of my back or my elbow with the kind of unconscious familiarity that suggested long intimacy. The relatives smiled and nodded and asked the questions that relatives ask. "How long have you been together? How'd you meet? Do you live together?" Malcolm answered smoothly, weaving a story that contained threads of truth woven through the fiction. "We've known each other for a while now. We met through work. We're taking things slow." I found myself playing along more easily than I'd expected, adding small details that made the story more believable. The way Malcolm liked his coffee. A fictional shared vacation to the coast. The restaurant where we supposedly had our first date. Each lie felt both wrong and strangely right, as if I were describing a life I might have lived in some parallel version of myself. By the time the salad course was served, I realized I hadn't thought about Evelyn once since arriving. The realization should have bothered me, should have sent me spiraling into guilt and self-recrimination. Instead, it felt like waking up from a long sleep, like suddenly remembering what it felt like to be fully present in my own life. Malcolm kept me close throughout the evening, his hand finding mine under the table during toasts, his shoulder brushing against mine as we listened to speeches. Each touch felt electric, charged with the knowledge that we were crossing lines neither of us had acknowledged existed. When his fingers intertwined with mine, during his uncle's rambling story about true love, I didn't pull away. Instead, I found myself squeezing back, holding on as if anchoring us both to something real in the midst of all this beautiful pretense. The hand-holding begins as performance, but transforms into something else entirely when Malcolm's cousin Derek makes a comment about commitment being dead in our generation. I feel Malcolm's grip tightening around my fingers, not just the practiced squeeze of someone playing a role, but something protective and immediate. The warmth that travels up my arm settles somewhere in my chest, spreading outward like ink in water. Derek is drunk and bitter about his own recent divorce, his words sharp and aimed at anyone who looks happy. But when Malcolm squeezes my hand under the cream-colored tablecloth, I realize the gesture isn't just for show. There's comfort in it, real comfort, and I find myself squeezing back with more conviction than the situation requires. The toasts drag on, each one more sentimental than the last, and I watch Malcolm's profile as he listens to his sister's maid of honor talk about true love conquering all. There's something vulnerable in his expression, a softness around his eyes that makes him look younger than his 33 years. When he catches me looking, he doesn't turn away. Instead, he leans closer, his breath warm against my ear as he whispers commentary about the speaker's nervous habit of tucking her hair behind her ear. I shouldn't be noticing these details. The way his voice drops when he's being conspiratorial. The scent of his cologne mixed with something else, something that might be a shampoo, or just the particular smell of his skin. The way he sits with one ankle hooked behind the other, a gesture so unconscious and familiar that it makes me wonder what other small habits I've cataloged without realizing it. When the band starts playing and people begin migrating toward the dance floor, Malcolm suggests we step outside for air. The reception hall has grown warm with bodies and celebration, and the idea of cool night air sounds like relief. We make our way through the crowd, Malcolm's hand finding mine again as we navigate between tables and dancing couples. Outside, the air is crisp and clean, carrying the scent of rain and the faint sweetness of the gardenias planted along the venue's entrance. The music from inside becomes muffled, a pleasant backdrop rather than an overwhelming presence. Malcolm pulls a pack of cigarettes from his jacket pocket, offering me one with a raised eyebrow. "I don't smoke," I tell him, though I watch as he lights one, the flame briefly illuminating his face in the darkness. He takes a long drag and exhales slowly, the smoke dissipating into the night air. "I didn't think you did," he says, but he doesn't put the pack away. Instead, he leans against the brick wall of the building, looking more relaxed than he is all evening. The nervous energy that had hummed beneath his surface during dinner seems to have dissipated in the cool air. We talk, And for the first time all evening, the conversation isn't about his family or our fictional relationship or the careful performance we've been maintaining. Instead, we talk about the things we've avoided telling anyone else. Malcolm speaks about leaving his last job without notice, simply walking out one Tuesday afternoon because he couldn't bear the thought of spending another day in that sterile office. He talks about driving to Montana on a whim, sleeping in his car for 3 nights while he figured out what came next. I find myself admitting things I've never said aloud. About the morning 2 years ago when I drove 6 hours to the coast without telling Evelyn, pulled over at a scenic overlook, and sat watching the tide roll in until sunrise. About how I sometimes stand in my perfect suburban yard and feel like I'm suffocating on the very air I've worked so hard to create. There's something liberating about these confessions, something that makes the space between us feel charged with possibility. Malcolm listens without judgment, nodding at the parts that resonate with his own experience of feeling trapped by expectations and circumstances. When we return inside, something has shifted. The performance feels less necessary, more natural. Malcolm keeps me close, but now it feels like choice rather than obligation. His hand rests at the small of my back as we move through the crowd. And when he leans in to share whispered observations about the dancing relatives, I find myself laughing in a way that feels genuinely spontaneous. The photographer captures us during one of these moments. Malcolm bent close to my ear while I smile at something he's just said. Later, looking at the image, we'll both be struck by how natural we look together, how much like a real couple we appear. But in the moment, I'm not thinking about photographs or performances or what any of this means. When the band plays a slow song, Malcolm doesn't ask permission. He simply takes my hand and leads me toward the dance floor, weaving between other couples who are swaying to the gentle melody. I should protest, should remind him that this is pushing the boundaries of our agreement, but instead, I let him guide me into the crowd of dancers. It's clumsy at first. I haven't danced with another man since college, and that was different, drunken, and experimental, and quickly forgotten. This is deliberate, public, witnessed by Malcolm's entire family. But as the music continues, we find our rhythm. Malcolm's hand is warm against my back, and when he pulls me closer, I don't resist. The world narrows to the space between us, to the heat of his cheek against mine, and the way his breathing matches the tempo of the song. I can feel the solid warmth of his chest against mine, the strength in his arms as he leads us through the simple steps of the dance. For a moment that stretches longer than the song itself, I forget everything else. The reception hall, the watching relatives, the careful lies we've constructed. Even Evelyn, waiting at home in a house that suddenly feels like it belongs to someone else entirely. In this bubble of music and movement, there's only Malcolm and the way he feels in my arms, solid and real and impossibly right. The evening ends in the parking lot under a sky that threatens rain, both of us reluctant to break the spell that has settled over the night. The reception has wound down, guests filtering out in small groups, their laughter echoing off the wet asphalt as they make their way to cars adorned with tin cans and streamers. Malcolm and I linger beside his borrowed vehicle, the air between us charged with something neither of us seems ready to acknowledge. He leans against the driver's side door, hands in his pockets, watching me with that same tilted head expression he wore the first night we met. There's something different about it now, though. Less curiosity, more certainty, as if the evening has answered questions he didn't know he was asking. "You don't have to go back yet," he says softly, and the words hang in the humid air like a challenge. The suggestion is simple enough, innocent on its surface. We could drive somewhere, find an all-night diner, extend this evening beyond its natural conclusion. But we both know he's offering something more complex than coffee and conversation. He's offering me a choice, a moment to step further away from the life I've built and deeper into whatever this is becoming. I feel something inside me shift, like a door I've kept locked for years suddenly swinging open. The sensation is both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing I want to jump. Not because I'm reckless, but because for the first time in longer than I can remember, I can see another way of being, another version of myself that exists beyond the careful boundaries I've constructed. I want to stay. The realization hits me with startling clarity, cutting through the confusion and the guilt and the rational voice that's been whispering warnings all evening. I want to follow Malcolm wherever he's going next. Want to see where this current between us might lead if we stop fighting it. The intensity of the desire frightens me, but not enough to make me turn away. Standing here in this dimly lit parking lot, I remember my wedding day 12 years ago. Evelyn in her simple white dress, her face radiant with happiness and certainty. The promises we made in front of everyone we loved, words about faithfulness and commitment and building a life together. I meant those promises when I spoke them, believed in them with the kind of naive certainty that comes before you really understand what a lifetime means. But I also remember the doubt that crept in during our honeymoon, the strange sense of disconnection I felt watching other couples on the beach. The way I found myself studying the men more than the women, wondering about lives I would never live, paths I would never explore. I pushed those thoughts down, buried them under the business of building a marriage and a career and all the other scaffolding of adult life. Now, with Malcolm watching me in the gentle glow of the streetlights, those buried truths surface with alarming clarity. I think about the yellow room in our house, painted for children who never came, now filled with Evelyn's craft supplies and my own growing sense of something missing. I think about the careful distance we've maintained for years, the way we've learned to live parallel lives that intersect mainly at mealtimes and bedtime, and the logistics of shared domesticity. There's nothing wrong with what Evelyn and I have built together. It's good and safe and comfortable, the kind of marriage that looks successful from the outside and feels adequate from within. But standing here with Malcolm, I realize that adequate has never been enough. I've been living like someone holding his breath underwater, and I'm only now surfacing to discover how much I need air. Malcolm doesn't push, doesn't ask me to explain the silence that has stretched between us. Instead, he simply steps closer, close enough that I can see the way the parking lot lights catch in his eyes, turning them almost green in the artificial illumination. When he lifts his hand and places it against my chest, directly over my heart, the gesture feels like both a question and an answer. The pressure of his palm is steady and warm, and I wonder if he can feel how fast my heart is beating, how the simple contact has sent electricity racing through my nervous system. I close my eyes and let myself imagine, just for a moment, what it would be like to say yes, to follow him to whatever comes next, to stop pretending that this is just friendship or performance or anything other than what it actually is. When I open my eyes, Malcolm is still watching me, his expression patient but intense. He's given me time to process, to work through whatever internal struggle is playing out across my face. But he's also making it clear that he's prepared to wait, that whatever I decide, he's not going anywhere. The rain that has been threatening all evening finally begins to fall, light drops that patter against the cars around us and send the last wedding guests hurrying to their vehicles. Malcolm doesn't move his hand from my chest, doesn't suggest we take shelter. Instead, he seems content to stand here in the gathering storm, his touch anchoring me to this moment, this choice, this recognition of something I've been avoiding for longer than I care to admit. I think about the man I was when I woke up this morning, getting dressed for a wedding I almost didn't attend, preparing to play a role I thought would be simple and temporary. That man feels like a stranger now, someone from another life entirely. In his place stands someone I'm only beginning to recognize, someone capable of wanting things he's never allowed himself to want. The truth settles over me like the rain, quiet and inevitable and impossible to ignore. I drive home through the rain in complete silence, the radio off, the only sound the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers and the hum of tires on wet asphalt. Malcolm's touch still echoes in my body like a phantom limb, the memory of his palm against my chest more vivid than the steering wheel under my hands. I took his number, programmed it into my phone with shaking fingers while the rain fell harder around us, but I didn't follow him to whatever came next. Not yet. Some part of me, the part trained by 12 years of careful living, needed to return home first, to sit with what had happened before making any choices I couldn't unmake. The house feels foreign when I step inside, like a museum exhibit of someone else's life. Everything is exactly as I left it hours ago, but my relationship to these familiar objects has fundamentally shifted. The wedding photo on the mantel, Evelyn and me frozen in black and white, both of us young and convinced we knew what we were promising each other. The coffee table with its neat stack of magazines, each one aligned precisely with the others. The throw pillows Evelyn arranges just so, creating the illusion of casual comfort in a room that has never felt casual to me. I sit on the edge of our bed and remove my dress shoes, setting them carefully in their designated place in the closet. My suit jacket hangs on the wooden valet, where it has hung after every formal occasion for years. But tonight, these rituals feel like someone else's muscle memory, actions performed by a man I no longer recognize. Evelyn returns 2 days later, arriving home with the punctuality that has defined our marriage. I hear her key in the lock at exactly 5:30, the sound followed by the familiar sequence of her homecoming. Keys in the bowl, purse on the hall table, shoes aligned beneath the coat rack. She calls my name, and I answer from the kitchen where I've been standing for the past 20 minutes, ostensibly preparing dinner, but mostly staring out the window at our perfectly maintained backyard. She looks exactly the same, of course. Rested from her weekend away, carrying a small gift bag that probably contains something thoughtful but modest from her sister's favorite boutique. Her hair is pulled back in the same style she's worn for years, practical and attractive without being dramatic. When she kisses my cheek in greeting, her lips are warm and familiar, but I feel like I'm watching the interaction from outside my own body. "How was the wedding?" she asks while unpacking her weekend bag, and I tell her it was lovely. Beautiful ceremony, nice reception, good food. All true as far as it goes. She nods and shares anecdotes about her sister's garden, the new restaurant they tried, the book club recommendation that has her excited to start reading again. We eat dinner at our usual time, sitting across from each other at the table we bought during our 3rd year of marriage. Evelyn talks about her plans for the week, the new display she's organizing at the library, her concern about her mother's recent doctor's appointment. I listen and respond appropriately, but part of me remains in that parking lot with Malcolm, feeling the weight of his hand against my heart and the promise of something I can't yet name. It's not until we're getting ready for bed that the careful normalcy begins to crack. I stand in the bathroom, brushing my teeth with the same methodical strokes I've used for decades, and catch sight of myself in the mirror. The man looking back at me appears unchanged, but his eyes hold something different. A knowledge, perhaps. Oh, wait. When I emerge from the bathroom, Evelyn is already in bed, reading a paperback novel with a bookmark made from pressed flowers. She looks up when I enter, and something in my expression must give me away because her smile falters slightly. "Are you all right?" she asks, setting her book aside. "You seem different tonight." I sit on my side of the bed, the mattress dipping under my weight with the same familiar give it has had for years. The words I need to say press against my ribs like birds trying to escape a cage, but when I open my mouth, what comes out is smaller than the truth, safer. I've been feeling different lately, I tell her, and even this partial honesty feels monumental. Like something in me is changing. Evelyn studies my face with the careful attention she brings to cataloging library books, trying to read between the lines of what I'm not saying. She's not naive, my wife. We've lived together long enough for her to recognize the signs of internal shift, the way people change imperceptibly until one day you wake up next to a stranger. "Are you leaving?" she asks, and the directness of the question catches me off guard. No accusations, no dramatics, just a simple inquiry that cuts straight to the heart of what we both know is happening. I look at her sitting there in her cotton nightgown, hair loose around her shoulders, and realize I don't know how to answer. The truth is I've already left in every way that matters. I left the moment I said yes to Malcolm's invitation, left further when I let him take my hand during dinner, left completely when I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what his touch meant to me. I don't know, I tell her, and even this admission feels like a small betrayal of the certainty we've built our marriage on. She nods slowly, as if she's been expecting this conversation for longer than either of us realized. "Okay," she says, and the word carries both sadness and something that might be relief. That night, I lie awake listening to her breathe beside me, memorizing the sound of it, the rhythm of a life lived in parallel to mine for 12 years. Somewhere in the darkness, I understand that this is one of our last nights together, even though neither of us has said so explicitly. In the morning, I write Malcolm a letter, not to declare love or make promises, but to acknowledge what has shifted inside me, to honor the way one evening has rewired something fundamental in my understanding of who I am and what I want. I write it longhand on paper I find in Evelyn's craft room, my pen moving slowly across the page as I try to capture something that feels too large for words. I don't mail the letter. Instead, I fold it carefully and place it in the drawer of my nightstand, next to the watch my father gave me when I graduated college and the spare reading glasses I never use. It rests there like a promise I'm not yet ready to make, a truth I'm still learning how to speak. 3 weeks pass in a strange suspension of time, each day feeling both endless and fleeting. Evelyn and I move through our house like careful dancers, maintaining the choreography of our shared life while something fundamental shifts beneath the surface. We still make coffee together in the mornings, still eat dinner at the same table, still sleep in the same bed. But we've stopped wearing our wedding rings. It happens without discussion, without ceremony. One morning, I simply leave mine on the bathroom counter after my shower, and when I return that evening, I find it resting beside Evelyn's on the kitchen counter, two thin circles of gold catching the fading light. Neither of us mentions it, but the absence on our fingers speaks louder than any conversation we might have had. The letter to Malcolm remains in my nightstand drawer, unread since the morning I wrote it. Some nights, I lie awake knowing it's there, feeling its presence like a small weight pressing against my consciousness. Other nights, I forget about it entirely, lost in the strange liminal space of a life in transition, of being neither fully committed to what was nor what might be. Evelyn begins staying later at the library, coming home with stories about reorganizing the reference section and helping patrons with research projects that stretch into the evening hours. I suspect she's giving us both space to process what's happening, creating distance that makes the inevitable feel less sudden. When she does return, she moves through the house with the quiet efficiency of someone packing for a long journey, though nothing visible has changed. I find myself taking longer routes home from work, driving past places Malcolm and I have never been together, but that somehow remind me of him. The coffee shop where we first talked 3 years ago. The park where I imagine he might go to think. The bookstore downtown that stays open late, its windows glowing warm and inviting in the early darkness of approaching autumn. It's on one of these extended drives that I see him. Not by accident, though I tell myself it might be. He's sitting on a bench outside the art museum, reading something on his phone, his profile silhouetted against the late afternoon sky. My heart performs some complicated maneuver in my chest, part recognition and part panic, and I find myself pulling into the parking lot without making a conscious decision to do so. He looks up when he hears my car door close, and his smile is immediate and warm, as if he's been expecting me, as if he's been waiting on this bench every day for 3 weeks, confident that I would eventually appear. Julian, he says, and my name in his voice sounds different than it does anywhere else, more substantial somehow, more real. We walk through the museum's sculpture garden without talking much, our feet finding a synchronized rhythm on the gravel paths. The late afternoon light filters through the trees, casting everything in golden tones that make the world feel suspended in amber. When we stop in front of a bronze figure reaching toward the sky, Malcolm finally breaks the comfortable silence. "I wasn't sure you'd call," he says, not looking at me, but at the sculpture's outstretched arms. "I haven't yet," I tell him, and he nods as if this makes perfect sense. "But you're here," he observes, and there's no question in it, just acknowledgement of the choice I've made to seek him out. We sit on a stone bench, facing a fountain that hasn't run in years, its basin filled with fallen leaves instead of water. Malcolm tells me about a job offer in Portland, freelance work that could turn into something more permanent if he wants it to. He talks about the client, about the creative possibilities, about the city he's never lived in, but has always been curious about. I listen and understand that he's telling me about a door that's opening, an opportunity that could take him away from here, from me, from whatever this is between us. But I also hear the question beneath his words, the invitation he's not quite ready to speak aloud. When are you leaving? I asked, though I'm not sure I want to know the answer. 2 weeks, he says. Maybe 3, depending on how quickly I can wrap things up here. The timeline feels both impossibly soon and mercifully concrete. 2 weeks to decide what kind of person I want to become. 2 weeks to choose between the safety of what I know and the uncertainty of what I might discover about myself. That evening, I sit at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee, growing cold in my hands. The house is quiet around me. Evelyn upstairs in what used to be our bedroom, the space filled with the gentle sounds of her preparing for sleep. The 2 wedding rings rest on the counter beside my elbow, and I study them in the lamplight, trying to remember the weight of mine on my finger. On the table beside me sits a small envelope, my name written across the front in Malcolm's careful handwriting. He'd slipped it into my jacket pocket while we walked back to our cars, his fingers brushing against my arm as he did so. I haven't opened it yet, but I can feel its presence like a small flame warming the space around my heart. I think about the man I was 3 weeks ago, sitting in his car outside a wedding reception, wrestling with a choice he didn't fully understand. That man feels like someone I knew once, but can barely remember now, someone from a different lifetime entirely. In his place sits someone I'm still learning to recognize, someone capable of wanting things he never allowed himself to want, someone brave enough to imagine a different kind of life. Outside, the street is quiet and dark. The suburban peace I once found comforting, now feeling like a held breath. I pick up the envelope, turn it over in my hands, feeling the slight weight of whatever Malcolm has written inside. Through the kitchen window, I can see the first light of dawn beginning to touch the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of possibility. I slip the envelope into my coat pocket without opening it, stand up from the counter, and walk toward the door. The morning air is cool against my face, carrying the scent of changing seasons and the promise of rain. Behind me, the house holds everything I've built over 12 years of careful living. Ahead of me, the street stretches toward town, toward Malcolm, toward a future I can't yet see but am finally ready to discover. The choice, I realize, has already been made. Now it's simply a matter of having the courage to live it.